Johannes Lecküchner is considered to be one of the most influential fencing authors in the Middle Ages in Germany. In sharp contrast to the other creators of fencing styles, his biography can be traced back exactly in history. The following information about this man has been supplied by Julia and Carsten Lorbeer, who are members of the Ochs organization and have kindly allowed us to make use of their research. The name Lecküchner and the various ways it's been spelt over the years suggests that he came from a family of bakers specializing in sweet biscuits known as Lebkuchen. Old documents at Leipzig University reveal that the man registered for the summer semester in the year 1455, and 2 years later, on the 17th of September 1457, he was awarded a baccalaureus degree. On the 27th of September in the same year, he was ordained as a priest. Then, on the 30th of June, 1478, Johannes Lecküchner registered for the summer semester at the University of Heidelberg, and later took over the job of a parish priest in Herzogenaurach after the original clergyman had turned the job down. 2 years later, he died in this office. This was also the year in which his most important work, the CGM 582 manuscript, was completed. This book, now lying in the Bavarian State Library in Munich, was dedicated to the Prince-Elector Philip. An earlier version of the teachings, the CGM manuscript, can be found in the Heidelberg University Library. It doesn't contain pictures, in contrast to the later richly illustrated Munich document. These days, when we attempt to think back to the days of the Middle Ages, we're presented with images of castles, noble ladies, and knights in shining armour with a sword in hand. A sword is always present. It appears to be the only weapon for everything and every purpose. A weapon for everyone and every situation? Hardly. It would be like saying silver-coloured Mercedes SL cars are the only ones to be seen on the roads. They are, without a doubt, excellent vehicles, but not for everybody and every purpose, quite unrealistic. It's equally unrealistic to say there was only one steel-bladed cutting weapon in use during the Middle Ages. Swords were extremely widespread, but few were allowed to have one or use it. These days, everyone is allowed to buy a Mercedes SL, but there are far more VW Golf models on the roads. The VW Golf of a weapon-carrying man was a long knife, which is best described as a short, falchion-like, single-handed sword or even knife in certain cases. It was a real working blade, which could be used for a variety of purposes and was not that expensive. They were simple in design with a blade shape that allowed the user to cut and thrust. It was so practical that the design of the hunting knife has been utilized for a number of weapons down to this day. As an example, a number of characteristics to be found in a Bowie knife were also part of the design of a number of medieval long knives. The fact that these knives were utilized for so many purposes is probably the reason why they're difficult to find today. The weapons were extremely simply made. Medieval artwork often depicts them being used as tools and were a forerunner to today's machete. The fact that long knives were seldom richly decorated and were seen as the poor man's weapon and tool, it meant that museum curators tended to ignore them and didn't put them on display for people to see. But one cannot ignore the fact that they were very popular and in wide use in the Middle Ages, and especially in the German-speaking areas. The long knife is generally a one-handed, single-sided blade. One characteristic aspect is the inclusion of a small guard on the side of the crossguard, often called Wehrnagel or weapon nail. The grip is usually riveted to a flat tang and has a similar shape to a modern kitchen knife. Certain sources imply that the term long knife covered all one-handed swords with single or double-edged blades. Let's take a closer look at this type of weapon. Roughly speaking, one can divide the knife up in two parts, the blade itself and the hilt. The blade consists of a long cutting edge and the short back edge, and the point. The grip is made up of the cross with the pin or Wehrnagel, the hilt and the pommel. The blade can be divided up in the way that force can be imposed. The part from the hilt to the middle of the blade is the Stärke or strong section. The other part down to the point is known as the Schwäche or weak section. As stated before, there are 2 manuscripts still in existence from fencing master Lecküchner. We have the CGM 582 in the Bavarian State Library in Munich and CPG 430 in the Heidelberg University Library. When comparing the 2 documents, it soon becomes clear that the Heidelberg document was the basic concept for the Munich work. Many long passages are the same, and one also finds part of the text which were later altered and can be found in the Munich version. Lecküchner also included new techniques in the Munich version, which are nowhere to be found in the earlier work in Heidelberg. Just like Liechtenauer's fencing instructions, the teachings of Lecküchner also appeared in later fencing documents. Shorter versions were often used, which still included all the important techniques. Good examples include the Hans von Speyer fencing manual and the works of Paulus Hector Meyer. The fencing manuscript, produced by Albrecht Dürer, also shows fencing positions taken from the teachings of Lecküchner. Incidentally, this manuscript also includes a copy of the Lecküchner text. In explaining his fencing methods, Lecküchner had strong connections to the Liechtenauer teachings. This can be seen in the general setting out of text in the glossary and key verse, and also in the names and divisions of the individual parts. Making a comparison between the techniques of Lecküchner and Liechtenauer, it soon becomes clear that they're practically identical. But Lecküchner not only deals with the well-known basic techniques generally applied in longsword combat, but also includes very advanced principles. The knife method also included many disarming tactics and grappling, which only appeared rather briefly in Liechtenauer's works. It can be more or less taken for granted that Johannes Lecküchner was a master in the art of fencing with a long sword and in grappling as well. Lecküchner lists 6 concealed strikes as well as 17 other main parts or technique groups. The first 5 strikes correspond to the 5 concealed strikes laid out by Liechtenauer, although they were called by different names. The 6th cut more or less corresponds to the technique described by a number of longsword works as Sturzhau. Further Stücke, meaning techniques or series of techniques carried out together, have their counterparts in longsword teachings. Tactically speaking, Lecküchner seems to have preferred fencing from a lower position, above all the Pastei fighting stance. From this he advocates thrusts and cuts to the opponent's hands. When striking, he favored what was known as the Entrüsthau. This technique he mainly used to safely bridge the gap to the opponent and to enter into grappling or disarming techniques. The term mensur or measure is used to describe the distance between 2 swordsmen. In long knife combat, the distance between 2 swordsmen is used in the same way as in longsword techniques. In the case of a wide measure, one has to introduce an intermediate step and then attack with a step forward. A medium measure allows one to reach an opponent with 1 step. At near measure, a swordsman can attack without having to take a step forward. Close measure means we're so close that grappling and wrestling techniques can be employed. The term blade in line means the blade is pointing to the opponent and threatens a target. Closing the line means blocking the opponent's ability to hit you directly. Vor and nach, or before and after, describe the principles of offense in the Liechtenauer teachings. Vor means striking before an opponent attacks and forcing him to remain on the defensive. It's always better to attack directly or to intervene during an opponent's preparations for an attack than wait for your opponent to start making a move. Nach or after means you have to react to an attack from your opponent. Should a prior attack from your opponent put you in the after, meaning you have to react, then you can use the principle of indis, during or meanwhile, which describes the act of responding almost simultaneously to an opponent's reaction, to cause a threatening situation for the opponent. The term indis is closely connected to the term fühlen. Fühlen describes the ability to sense the degree of pressure exerted by an opponent in a bind and to use it to your advantage. An opponent can put pressure forwards, upwards, or to the side. The trick is to recognize the pressure direction in a stress situation and turn it to your advantage. Just like longsword techniques, long knife techniques see a person divided up into 4 target areas. Lecküchner called them the 4 Zinnen to separate them from Liechtenauer's Blößen. The concept to divide the target sectors with a horizontal and a vertical line which crossed around the area of the solar plexus remained the same. Here you can see the training weapons used for long knife training. First, a long knife made of aluminium for training with a partner. Then we have a sharp weapon for cutting tests and solo exercises, as well as a shinai around the size of a long knife for full contact-free fencing. Now to the protective clothing needed to reduce the chance of injuries during training. We recommend a fencing mask, a stiff neck protector, a padded jacket and protective gloves, which you can find, for instance, in shops selling lacrosse or ice hockey equipment.